We have with us today from Paris, France, Dennis Roger Denocola. His talk is on visitors from 18 different extraterrestrial civilizations who are working with us on Earth, believe it or not. Dennis will delve into an inquiry of the origins and purpose of UFOs and crop circles. Here a panorama of our space visitors backed by thousands of documents, and also he's deciphered an extraterrestrial language. It's really fantastic. Well, welcome, Dennis, from Paris.
I will talk about the Ummo file, which is an event that happened in 1950 in south of France, where some element, some proof that some UFO landed in 1950. And it was the beginning of a very, very amazing story. That is what I will present you, and the element they give make me present some theory to explain how UFO can move, how we can have a cosmology that make UFO able to come. Mm-hmm. And why and how the crop circle are made, and who made them.
Who made them? All right.
Who made them? Some guys with What is the Ummo planet? The Ummo planet is first the document about those guys who are sent to many people, mostly scientists, but also common people or people involved in UFO. So those people receive the letters and the reports that explain where they are coming from, how they are living, how is their mathematics, how is their cosmology, how is their language, how they live.
How they live.
How they live. And all those letters have been gathered. Well, they say they are 3,860 pages. We just only get 1,400 letters, the half. So there is still some letters we are looking for. But with those letters gathered, it was possible for me to analyze them and to make a big database to analyze the words. There were special words you will see in a few minutes in those letters, and that meant nothing for nobody. During 60 years, nobody was able to understand those words. In 2004, I done the deciphering of those words. That understanding have nothing to see with any language, any terrestrial language. It's absolutely different from any terrestrial language. That made me easier to understand something. So maybe it's an old. I don't know what's the goal of such an hoax, if it's hoax. Why to do such a thing during so many years for nothing?
Ces positions de l'homme dans le cosmos et de sa responsabilité dans l'évolution du cosmos qui fait que le primate
n'a pas de responsabilité
face à l'évolution du cosmos, mais l'humain, lui, devient responsable. Position de l'homme dans le cosmos et de sa responsabilité dans l'évolution du cosmos qui fait que le primate
n'a pas de responsabilité.
Since the 60s, Denocola has been studying the file known as the Ummo file. Globally, A certain number of scientists on the planet claim to have received documents sent by an extraterrestrial civilization. The circles contain the secret blueprint of Ummo Locomotion systems, which enable their crafts to travel throughout space. Denocla has written this book, Presence, which I highly recommend. This fascinating book gives a quick technical overview of the topic of alien mythology. Although during the course of this lecture we're going to talk about UFO phenomenon in its totality, the topic of which Denocla speaks in his book specifically is of crop circles. These famous circles found in the fields in summer are totally unexplained phenomena. Their origins and creation have been a well-documented mystery. Our lecturer, however, has a whole new approach on the system of cosmology, which he will cover in detail. All these themes are going to be covered in today's lecture. For about 60 years, UFO phenomena has been recorded and counted in hundreds of sightings, but it is not new. Sightings of extraterrestrial phenomena have been around for thousands of years. For example, the cave paintings found in Australia and certain stones carved by Celtic civilizations very possibly are depictions of UFOs. In the contemporary period, we have more precise data and more evidence. One of the fundamental key points to look at in the overall understanding of the phenomenon begins in the 1930s when, on Earth, we began making radioelectrical experiments to communicate with radio waves all over the planet. Radio waves rebound on the ionosphere in order to travel and communicate throughout the world. In recent experiments, a strange effect has been noted in that some of them don't bounce back from the ionosphere but continue out into the cosmos. So our Earth, after the 1930s, becomes a very noisy planet in terms of electromagnetic waves that travel at the speed of light and propagate themselves in a radiating manner all around the Earth. The Earth, which was just a grain of sand lost in the ocean, becomes finally a kind of pulsar of electromagnetic waves. What does this imply? It means that all the beings that have the means of receiving electro signals, instead of focusing on the hundreds of thousands of worlds in the cosmos, are going to focus more precisely on those that make noise, specifically Earth.
Dans les années 30, la planète devient bruyante, et ça c'est extrêmement important, car pendant la guerre...
So the planet becomes noisy. This is a very important point to consider. During the war in the 40s, the Germans noticed devices of various sizes that looked like little flying spheres of every size. They thought they were Allied machines, but the Allies had noticed the same devices which they suspected were Nazi in origin, while the Russians accused the Americans of having secret craft. Everyone thought it was someone else during the war, but after the war they realized that it wasn't the various war factions that put these devices together.
Les phénomènes continuent et il faut bien se rendre compte que ce ne sont pas les différents belligérants qui ont mis au point des armes secrètes. Alors,
so, as these sightings continued, others have been associated with them, most notably crop circles.
Sont associés à cela, notamment les crop circles.
des éléments très intéressants concernant les crop circles.
There is also interesting data concerning crop circles themselves. This is a file we've been working on for the newspaper with Paul Sutter. The information given to us by Sutter gives us a technological scientific basis from which to construct a certain number of temporal particles, some of which were based on the drawings of the crop circles we talk about in the book, Presence. By comparing a certain number of Ummo texts, we have uncovered important data about the origin and purpose of these crop circles. In the beginning, I pretty much ignored the crop circles as many people do. I assumed that pranksters have made these patterns in the fields of wheat and that they would get too old and the crop circles would stop. But instead, the circles were becoming more and more complex. As they continued to appear, we realized that it couldn't be the work of humans playing a practical joke. These are very complicated mathematical constructions, fractals, and very elaborate conceptual presentations. With Tom Sutter, we did a small typology so we could get an idea of what we could understand from these patterns. There were specifically two circles that were remarkable, that most people have heard of, the one at Chilbolton and the one at Crabwood Farm in England. They are relatively close to one another. Crabwood Farm is the one where you see the head of an extraterrestrial with a disk written in ASCII, in binary language, which has a specific meaning and which was carefully deciphered and identified.
Alors, il y avait une petite polémique sur ce CD-ROM.
One of the words mentioned brought about a bit of controversy that will be explained in detail. Within the team of people that worked on this identification, there were some different opinions on one of the words. I worked on this with an American, Louis Osborne. At one point, a tractor went through the field and destroyed some of the code. However, if you put the wheat back into position, the word that was hard to understand becomes the word believe.
Pourquoi believe? Il y a une bonne raison.
How do we come to this interpretation? Well, firstly, we are in the UK, and therefore it is quite likely that it is written in English. This is a very powerful reason, don't you agree? Yet some people thought it was a word written in an extraterrestrial language, but it is so easily interpreted in English.
Alors, le contenu traduit de ce texte, c'est
The content of this message is, beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. Much pain, but still time. Believe there is good out there. We oppose deception, conduit closing. So it is written in very clear language, but at the same time it is difficult to interpret.
Ce petit personnage filiforme.
This small wire peace and love figure probably refers to the fact that in the 70s we sent the Arecibo message into the cosmos.
On a envoyé depuis le radiotélescope d'Arecibo un message dans le cosmos.
And we also sent the Voyager probe a message containing a peace and love figure, trying to communicate the fact that our population is a welcoming one.
Que constate-t-on en réalité?
And yet, the way we welcome extraterrestrials is not as kind. On one hand, contemporary science denies the existence of extraterrestrial civilizations, basing this opinion on the supposed distance and the speed of light, which would make space travel impossible. This leads to a blanket policy which denies the existence of extraterrestrials despite thousands of observations by witnesses collected over decades. Beware the people in charge of your institutions. They are the bearers of false gifts and false promises.
Beaucoup de douleur, c'est quelque chose qui est malheureusement encore d'actualité.
Much pain is still going on right now. It is important to note, however, that we hope to change society for the best, for our children. And this is reflected in a message of hope from our visitors. Believe there is good out there. In other words, be convinced that elsewhere, even if we, speaking as a voice of the visitors, do not intervene, there are some positive forces at work. This message encourages us to conceive of all the beings in the cosmos as a potential solidarity. These are sentiments that are found in various documents. They're a kind of constant refrain throughout these sources. We oppose deception. So, as we understood it, this deception has to do with deception by the people in charge of our society, the officials in charge of the various institutions. And this point of view on extraterrestrials is very categorical concerning the management of our governors, the people governing us. They are categorically very cynical and dangerous. But this is one of the good reasons to enable people to become aware that there are other points of view, not only on the Earth, but there are other ways of looking at things. So keep this in mind while I tell you some other facts about the crop circles themselves. So, as we look at the CD-ROM here, it's held by the hand of this figure. Since it's a CD-ROM, we can extrapolate the size of the figure in relationship to the size of the CD-ROM, and assuming that it is a conventional CD-ROM, you see that it is an ASCII binary code. So we have this person who has a large head, macrocephalic, which is 30% larger in size than our own heads, and the being is about 3 meters tall. And he's pretty thin and has a much larger head than body. I worked with Frédéric Laurent to prepare this book based on my notes of research, and we worked very hard on this project. And he said, "Denis, why don't you talk about the 4 planets, since you talk about it later?" So let's talk about these planets now. Let me direct your attention to this pattern on the crop circle and these 4 points with lines going through them. If we look at them as planets and not UFOs, their significance takes on an entirely new meaning. On the inner side of the first planet, there are 2 planets, which are almost aligned, and one that has a bit outside. It is important to see how they are laid out. Now, going back to the message of Arecibo, a very innocent one, we have crop circle in Chilbolton, which directly addresses the Arecibo message. I don't think this is by chance. There are 2 separate crop circles, or squares in this case, or rectangles. This is a response to the Arecibo message, exactly the same pattern, plus a few modifications, and turned upside down. I'll take the bottom parts and show you how it works. Here above we have decimals and codes, and then a particular number that corresponds to our DNA here. There are a few modifications in the Chilbolton answer. I believe they have included the chemical abbreviation for silicon. It documents our population in 1974 or 1970, I'm not sure. And here we have the average size of human beings, 1 meter, 455 centimeters. But here the size is not the same. Here we have our solar system. Here at the bottom we have a description of the Arecibo radio telescope with its dimensions. Let's look at that for a moment. Here is the Arecibo telescope, and in response to that we have this pattern. Previously, we had the same, but not exactly the same background as the usual pattern of all crop circles.
Poor sweet creature.
All crop circles have had a similar design since 1970. Before that, we had traces, but they weren't actually crop circles, so this is the classic layout of all crop circles. The next year, in the same place, we have what? You don't know? What do you mean you don't know? Here, Mr. Denocla makes a joke, pretending not to know what this formation is, and his listeners demanding a refund. He continues to say, seriously though, It's actually a fractal interferometer, which we've set up in South America. So this fractal interferometer received the Arecibo message to within about 800 meters. I'm not sure of the exact measurement. What's interesting to notice is that this Chilbolton crop rectangle is connected to all the others because of this pattern shown on the screen. So to review what was said in reply to the message, we have a small man with a DNA sequence which is slightly larger than humans. Height is 1 meter 4 centimeters. The population is 21.3 billion people, which is what it was in 2001. So that was the data sent to us in the crop circle. Since then, the IDUDT have said that the solar system depicted here had to be another solar system than our own. They are describing their own solar system's parameters. Therefore, this has to be a depiction of their solar system, their home, which I'm going to look at. They are compared to each other here. Here we have our solar system, we have the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and the Earth, and we have Earth on a separate line indicating that there is life here, and to show our location.
Nous sommes où il y a de la vie en tout cas. Et dans la réponse, nous avons quoi? Eh bien, nous avons 4.
We have 4 planets with a discrepancy of 1 and a third planet that is on a separate line. So what would you conclude? We could conclude that that's where they come from, these people. This indicates quite a complex planetary system because they have 2 planets with almost the same orbit. And in this orbital area, we have 4 planets, one closer to this sun and one further away, and 2 sharing a very similar orbital trajectory.
Sur cette zone orbitale, on a finalement 4 planètes, une avec une orbite un petit peu intérieure et une autre avec une orbite extérieure, et 2 avec à peu près la même trajectoire orbitale. Est-ce que ça vous rappelle pas quelque chose?
Does this remind you of anything? Look again. Here we have these 2 planets with such a similar trajectory, they are very similar to the 4 planets represented on the Crabwood Farm crop circle. And we can see this fairly well on the Crabwood Farm circle.
Les 4 planètes qui sont représentées sur l'agroglyphe de Crabwood Farm. Et ça tombe bien parce qu'en plus Crabwood Farm et Chilbolton, ça se trouve, quand vous voyez ça d'avion, on voit les 2 crop circles en même temps.
But because of their proximity, you can view both crop circles from the air. They are close in proximity and were made only a few days apart.
Parce que moi je suis pas astrophysicien, mais donc je me suis dit tiens c'est marrant, et si on se posait la question vers où ils ont envoyé.
Now, I'm not an astrophysicist, but I find it curious to look at where the Arecibo message was directed. It's interesting to note that the Arecibo message was directed coincidentally into the M13 cluster in the Hercules constellation with a very precise, very narrow angle of 1 degree. This is very narrow. The message wasn't in the SETI program, it was sent simply to inaugurate the radio telescope, in fact. So they sent this message and it goes out into space. So we looked out in this direction. Where exactly did it go? And where did it stop? Because obviously it went very far. So the key is the following. Our friends who made this beautiful crop circle have been here since the 1990s, and they wanted to tell us something, since they waited over 10 years to do so before making a crop circle very close to another radio telescope. and we think they wanted to indicate something about the way the message was sent. We think it was a reply to the Arecibo message. Why did they wait so long, and what is it they wanted to tell us? The Arecibo message went in 1974, and we have their answer in 2001. 2001 minus 1974 is 27 years. So in answer to the question, where did the Arecibo message stop, we thought we'd look at what we see about 27 light years from here. So we looked between 25 and 30 light years away. What do we find there? Well, not much, actually. Maybe only 2 solar systems. The first one didn't make any sense, so we cast that one aside. So we only have one left to look at, and that one fit pretty well. It's Mu Hercules A, and it's quite a complex solar system. It's located 27.4 light years away, so it fits. And it has an old giant star in expansion phase. So let's look at the way the planets are organized in the planetary system here, using this diagram to represent them. Based on the mass that is represented and where they are located, we can establish on these planets that there's a possibility of life, where life could have developed. This G5 is probably growing, so it's becoming warmer. So it's possible our visitors are living here. However, it's possible they migrated there and that originally they came from other planets, thousands of years ago. And because the sun was becoming too warm for them, they had to move out, and only the existing high temperatures remained in one of these closer planets. So we have a beautiful hypothesis of the localization of our Mu Herculesians who are somewhere in this solar system. We detected a very high probability that this is the case. There is at least one large exoplanet around Mu Hercules A. So we have a system of exoplanets around Mu Hercules A, and it is very likely that this is the solar system represented in the crabwood crop rectangle.
Le visage était assez énigmatique au début.
So, this face was kind of an enigma at first. We wondered if it was a human face or was it an extraterrestrial face? But at least it looked a lot like a human face, and that fits because we already have the face of a Mu Herculesian. This is what their faces look like. So obviously the other face is not that of an extraterrestrial. So why would they draw an earthling in a field next to Chilbolton? Any ideas? Well, moving on, let's investigate further. I have a few friends working on the orientation of these crop circles. Some were saying it could be aligned with the Cheops pyramid, this curve points to Egypt, this point crisscrosses that one, etc. But maybe we don't have to go as far as Egypt. All that seemed a little complicated. I think we should remain simple. The code in the rectangle isn't laid out by chance in the middle of a field. It's with the top and bottom of the code orientated, directed from the top to the bottom. And if we look at this code, it is precisely aimed toward the antenna of the Chilbolton Observatory, as if they wanted to indicate to us, with some humor, that this is a reply to the Arecibo message, as if they wanted it to be sent to the telescope of Chilbolton, but making a little joke for us by putting it in the field, but meaning it to go toward the antenna. It's maybe British humor, or rather Herculesian humor, but it is the kind of humor that is interesting and friendly.
C'est quand même, je dirais peut-être de l'humour anglais, mais c'est une forme d'humour qui, en tout cas, me paraît tout à fait sympathique. Et puis, si je raisonne de la même manière pour ce visage...
Now, if we think in the same way looking at this face, zeroing in on the top and the bottom of this face, you see that this face has a very precise orientation, and it is oriented where? Towards the buildings of the CCC-LRC of the Chilbolton Observatory, which is where the staff work. So, of course, we asked some questions to the people working in this lab, and obviously, none of the people working there had any knowledge of the crop circle. They said they had no affiliation with it, especially the head of the lab at the time the crop rectangle was made. He reiterated to us that they were absolutely not involved with the crop circle in any capacity.
Et qu'elle n'avait évidemment rien à voir avec cet agroglyphe.
Il y a énormément de polémiques sur les documents humides.
There's a lot of controversy on the subject of the Ummo documents. Some believe that they are a kind of conspiracy planted by a covert arm of government or defense like the KGB, and others believe it's some foreigners playing a practical joke. If so, it's a joke that has been played out for decades. These documents enable us to ascertain information about the origins and purpose for these crop circles. This seems to be an entire program elaborated in the 60s and complexified over the years until 2007, when we found some very interesting information indeed. Denis, you've studied these documents more than anyone else in France and Europe. I'd like you to tell us what you've concluded comparing these hundreds of documents that we talk about in the
Dans un
book
premier
Presence.
temps, tu as travaillé sur
At first, I worked on the classification of the extraterrestrial races. What was very surprising was that I couldn't find any similar documents. So I told myself I'd make a small typology of the beings we observed through the sightings listed in these various working groups. And I couldn't find anything really convincing. But it turned out that the Ummo documents contained references to other extraterrestrial races and civilizations. So, using what these Ummo people informed us with, we were able to count 18 races. So I compared a number of Ummo documents with all the information I'd gathered for the last few years, trying to compare the data, and I concluded I could indeed group the data into about 18 races, but I'm sure there's a lot more. So, we have a database of documents to talk about various races. It's interesting to see that races talk about other civilizations, and our Earth seems to be like a little meeting point or coffee shop. We have reference dates of when they arrived and when they left the planet, the folds in space that they used to come here. We have information about what they used to come here, how frequently they visited. We have the name of their planet, the name of the star around which their planet orbits, the solar system they came from. The text even mentions information about their population, the number of inhabitants on their planet, their physical characteristics such as their approximate size, ornithological elements of their size, of their limbs, physical characteristics, also where they're located, the mountains, the areas in probably every country of the world. Some of them are integrated in the very social fabric of human society. That's the case with Ummo men. We have information about what their purpose is here, whether they're here to do, for example, ethnological studies.
On a aussi leurs lieux d'implantation, c'est là où on apprend qu'il y a des lieux d'implantation dans les montagnes, dans les mers, dans les villes, à peu près dans tous les pays du monde. Il y en a qui sont dans le tissu social, si je puis dire, terrestre.
Assez exceptionnel.
And we also have information about their spacecraft, the technology used to go through several light years in a short amount of time. So we have quite a bit of info on these 18 races, so we created a chart. Some Ummo have been here since the 1500s, and some have been here since before 30,000 BC. And so we have some very, very interesting info as long as we take the various Ummo sources mentioned very seriously.
En 1967, on nous indique que la planète Mars, sur la planète Mars, il doit y avoir, on dit il y a des êtres unicellulaires qui sont sur la planète Mars. Ça, on nous le dit en 1967, et à l'époque, il est absolument sûr qu'il n'y a pas grand monde qui pouvait imaginer ce qu'il pouvait même y avoir sur Mars. C'est-à-dire qu'en fait, on pouvait même encore imaginer qu'il y avait des Martiens sur Mars. Donc, pour pouvoir affirmer que les seuls êtres qui sont sur Mars, ce sont des êtres unicellulaires, en 1967, c'était quand même déjà très très audacieux. Or, on sait bien qu'il y a eu au minimum des êtres unicellulaires sur Mars, puisque un certain nombre de formations gazeuses ne peuvent s'expliquer que parce qu'il y a eu des organismes unicellulaires. D'accord ? Autre étrangeté donc dans ces lettres. En 1966, encore dans ces documents communs relatifs au dossier Ummo, eh bien on nous parle des antibiotiques en 1966. Et on nous dit en 1966, faites bien attention aux antibiotiques car ils vont vous développer des virus résistants aux antibiotiques. Et dans un certain nombre d'années, vous aurez de très très nombreuses espèces de virus résistants aux antibiotiques. Alors ce sujet des résistances aux antibiotiques est devenu sérieux dans les années 2000. À partir des années 2000, on commence à se dire que peut-être qu'il va peut-être falloir faire quelque chose pour éviter ce problème de la résistance des virus aux antibiotiques. Donc là, vous voyez, 35 ans avant, on a une alerte sur ce sujet. Très curieux. Donc encore des gens qui sont des blagueurs, certainement. En 66 encore, une autre lettre nous indique des possibilités d'utiliser des cellules souches. Alors, elle ne s'appelle pas cellule souche dans le document, elle s'appelle Typical Cell Artificial. Et Typical Cell Artificial, ça veut dire cellule souche. Alors, les premières, il parle de chirurgie réparative à l'aide de ces cellules souches. Et donc, il faut savoir, enfin, vous le savez certainement, mais je vous le rappelle, que les premières thérapies géniques ont lieu qu'en 1999. Donc là encore, 30 ans avant, on attire notre attention, enfin quelqu'un, certainement un blagueur, attire notre attention sur le fait que ce serait pas mal d'utiliser des cellules souches à différentes fins de thérapie génique. Et puis, la cerise sur le gâteau dans mes petits exemples, puisqu'il y a des gens qui disent que ces documents sont un canular, hein, très bien, un canular. Eh bien, vous vous rappelez qu'en 2003, les astronomes découvrent une planète qu'on appelle Xena. Alors Xena, en fait son petit nom c'est 2003 UP 313 comme chacun sait, et son surnom c'est donc Xena. Alors, il se trouve que, curieusement, dans un document daté de 1979, donc 25 ans avant la découverte de Xena, on a un document qui nous indique que, après, au-delà de Pluton, il y a une planète. Rigolo, non? Donc 25 ans avant que l'on découvre Xena, ce document humain nous indique qu'il y a une planète au-delà de Pluton. Mais bon, ça doit être ça doit être une blague, hein, à mon avis, ça doit être une blague. On peut dire ça au hasard. Et donc, comme j'ai dit ça au hasard, en fait, et moi je suis un peu joueur, et j'ai décidé d'être encore plus joueur. Et puis je vais vous donner la position de la planète. Parce que dans le cosmos, personne ne vous entend crier. Eh bien, là, on va vous entendre calculer. Et quand vous calculez la planète, l'orbite moyenne de cette planète Xena, qui est une planète avec une orbite un peu particulière, eh bien, vous obtenez la même orbite moyenne que celle qui est indiquée où dans les documents communs, avec 5% de marge d'erreur.
Il y a aussi une autre idée qui est venue grâce à ce corpus.
Another interesting feature of the documents is the overriding philosophy of non-intervention on the planet Earth. If we are the object of observation by these exocivilizations, some of these exocivilizations are in charge of our protection and the access to our Earth. Some of them have a mindset that would be considered relatively incompatible with our own evolution, and their interferences are judged as a disturbance or dangerous for us. So how access is given is mentioned in several Ummo documents.
Pourrait être perturbatrice.
Cursed are the heavens that tear your seventh heaven.
This is quite surprising. The documents go further in non-aggressive invasion in that these particular races are mentioned in Ummo texts, but also Atienza texts, and from another source, the Atienza. The Ducaeans are the civilization that controls access to our planet. They mention another civilization which is quite ancient and sophisticated and developed, to which they refer and ask for directions when they set out on missions to foreign planets. So, any exocivilization that can venture here can't go beyond their control. They have to ask permission because our civilization isn't developed enough. It's too young, too adolescent. A revelation of this kind could set up very strong social repercussions here, wars, for example, and given the state of our civilization in terms of religion and politics, knowledge of the extraterrestrial presence here could be very disruptive. I believe the Ducaeans are mentioned in these Ummo documents. The hypothesis I developed, by extrapolation, is that there is a kind of Pax Galactica that would enable them to regulate all the possibilities of reaching the Earth, accessing the Earth, and ensuring that the civilizations coming to visit us would have a psychology that is compatible to encountering us, and that they would have a non-invasive and discreet way of approaching us.
Et donc on s'assurerait que nos visiteurs ont en tout cas des psychologies compatibles à notre rencontre discrète et
non invasive.
Et non invasive.
Et non belliqueuse. On va continuer pour passer à la cosmologie humaine.
We are going to continue to talk about Ummo Cosmology because, obviously, in order to go through space, you have to have a cosmology that is not only theoretical, but is also mathematical and physical. And you need spacecraft that can make this kind of space travel possible, indicating quite advanced technology. So, we are going to start by speaking about the universe, the way it's understood to exist in its general form by Ummo people.
Comment est-il présenté chez eux?
Alors déjà dans les années 70, des gens
In
comme
the
Andrei Sakharov
1970s, Andrei Sakharov developed a new cosmology that is multi-layered. In Sakharov's cosmology, he uses multi-layers of the universe, pairs of cosmoses that evolved into sequences over time.
Il s'agissait plutôt de succession, en fait, si vous voulez, de Big Crunch et de Big Bang, avec des paires de cosmos anticosmos et qui évoluaient au fil des
Imagine
séquences.
a big bathtub, and these bubbles are paired up in twos. All of these are pairs of cosmoses. That is what the universe is made up of. Incidentally, the reason you've never heard me talk about universes, only cosmoses, is because I'm referring to these pairs of cosmoses. When I speak about all the cosmoses, I use the term universe. Now, when we look at the work of Sakharov to explain the coming of UFOs, then the research becomes really interesting, and it enabled people like Brenner to develop theories. It took us until the 1990s to finalize these concepts, and we use them in what's now known as the string theory. In 1998 to 99, we started to assemble the puzzle that we found in these documents. String theory is not as coherent because it depends upon mathematical dimensions that we use, whereas in Ummo Cosmology, we have a mathematical model of the universe which is not fixed, but is basic. The very concept of dimensions needs to be revised. They give us a cosmology model of the dimensions as angular. From this concept, they give us the word ibozzo. This is an Ummo word, ibozzo, which is a substrata. The universal substrata of all these cosmological entities, in other words, universal substrata in multi-dimensions, is made up of at least 10 dimensions, time, space, etc. These 10 substrata can be compared to this recently developed model of string theory.
Les 10 dimensions décrites par nos amis humains sous forme d'ibozzo sont assimilables à quelque chose que nous avons développé récemment.
This all might seem quite abstract, but they are quite important because within these cosmoses there are masses about which we aren't familiar. These unknown masses, because they have dimensions, are of great importance in our daily life.
Un effet extrêmement important, même sur notre vie quotidienne.
This is the chronology of the Big Bang. 0 dimensions, and then time appears, then another plane, and 3D. Then we have the configuration that is similar to the Euclidean model of space-time. So you see the strange shape of our conceptual typology here. Why is it in the shape of a horse saddle? Because, in fact, there is a negative bubble, areas on conceptual thought concerning the cosmoses that are limited. And so, typologically, we're not dealing with a positive curve that would give you a sphere. With our typology, there is a negative curve like a pancake. Imagine that this cosmology is going to change shape depending on our cosmological advances. When a typology develops which is suitably advanced, and we go through the electromagnetic field of the light paths, we're going to emerge from this pancake out of the tridimensional framework and go through another tridimensional framework, and it's going to give us a shortcut to a planet, let's say, 15 years from the Earth. You see right away that this is faster. It's a shorter path. Instead of 50 light years, I'm going to reduce the distance or time to maybe 3 light years, the distance between these 2 points. However, according to the Ummo documents, we're in a 10-dimensional framework. We presently work within a 4-dimensional framework, but there are still 6 other dimensions, just to make it simple. So let's look into 3 others. E equals d mc squared. This is what happens if we apply this here. If we apply this to a UFO spacecraft which goes through another tridimensional framework, it's going to rise in energy until it reaches a critical threshold, and then it will collapse dimensionally in a way, then it will restitute in energy as a mass, and then reconstitute. This is why we have strange disappearances of UFO spacecraft. When you observe a UFO that turns at a 90-degree angle, your eyes are deceiving you. Instead of doing a 90-degree angle and taking 300 Gs of centrifugal force, which would be impossible for any living being to survive, in reality what is happening is that the craft is changing its tridimensional framework. Instead of a visible right-angle trajectory, the craft goes through another tridimensional space, goes through a loop, and comes back out again in order to make this 90-degree angle. This is so the beings who are inside the craft are not subjected during this time gravitation to up to 300 Gs. However, the observer sees the angle and doesn't see that the UFO switched from our space-time to a kind of hollow inside the other space-time from which it emerges at high speed. Why? Because the craft makes a loop, and then it comes back out at a higher speed because it picks up speed because of the anticosmos.
Eh bien, en fait, il y aura un peu plus de vitesse en sortant, parce que justement, il aura acquis de vitesse à cause de l'autre cosmos.
Chaque paire de cosmos est dotée majoritairement d'un cosmos avec de la matière.
Each cosmos pair with one cosmos has matter dominating, and the anticosmos has antimatter dominating, which in reality is not structured like matter. There is a slight difference between matter and antimatter. Antimatter does not appear in the same way as matter, in such a way that we can touch it around us. This antimatter, which is a priori rather protonic, and it doesn't have these electron layers set up in the same way as the matter proton. So, in our antimatter cosmos, we don't have a planet or a structured solar system, but rather huge masses of matter going through an effect called the border effect, which has an impact on our matter cosmos. How does this impact occur? Through an intermediary membrane called exodi in the Ummo Cosmology.
Est dite Xoodi dans la cosmologie de nos amis humains. Dans notre membrane.
So, in this cosmos, we have imaginary masses like a loudspeaker. On each side of the loudspeaker, we have air. It is the pressure of this air that makes it possible for us to hear sound. So it's exactly like the manifestation of these imaginary masses that are found in the anticosmos, the effect of which we feel as this membrane effect. Because this membrane lets gravitation go through, this is what we see, the famous black masses. Black energy is easy to explain because the mass is on the other side, it moves, etc. And so, to find the missing mass, you just have to look for it where it is, on the other side.
Nous avons une vague d'ovnis qui est corrélée en fait avec un événement.
In 1943, we had a UFO wave correlated, in fact, to a very specific cosmological event. Space folding, large and long-lasting folding of space, enabled exocivilizations to travel through space and to come within reasonable delays of time to visit us. If we want to look at the typology, the spaces of the craft that have come to us, 70 to 80% are small, very basic, simple aircraft. Here in this pie chart, we have a diagram of space and the critical mass for a spacecraft to attain in order to switch tridimensional frameworks. You see that the charted weight in this area is not the same for a cigar or an egg or a flying soccer ball or a flying saucer. Even for a traditional flying saucer, it is not the same, depending on the shape. For a flying tagine, for example, we still have another
C'est
pattern.
encore une autre montée en charge. Et pour le tagine volant, nous avons encore autre chose. Alors ce plissement qui permet de prendre
So, this folding, which enables us to take shortcuts, is in reality much more complex than a wave or a fold. It is likely much more like an accordion, so there are many folds.
Il y a plein de plis et ça fait l'accordéon. Alors ici j'ai la vitesse de la lumière.
And you can see the light going through the pancake. So it has a long way to go. It takes a long time to get there, even supposing you've got the speed of light. But of course, we never go the speed of light. The idea is to go across the crests. Here is a phenomenon like a tunnel effect that enables a craft to go even faster, but here it would still take 6 to 9 months to travel between planets. The cosmology, of which you have a very good understanding, is based on the natural force of the universe. It concerns how an impact on the relay layer between cosmos and anticosmos will always have a return on the impulsion from the anticosmos. I believe we mentioned this hypothesis, the return impact being a sine wave, and that it assumed that we had to travel in a horizontal way in order to impact this membrane layer in a consistent manner, in order to have the same wave height. However, if the idea is to go down, all we need to have is the use of the tau of the first impact in order to achieve a progressive descent where the craft lowers gradually. We have a particular article about the work of Searle and his SEG theory, which consists of concentric rings in which cylinders turn in on themselves. Searle's machine, or Searle's disk, launches a device which self-generates energy, so that over time it creates a high empathetic differential and a kind of ionization on the periphery, which creates magnetic walls all along the craft. The only problem with this is that it breaks. So, in 1968, Searle wrote his first experiments to see if his technology made it possible to create a levitation effect. So, the Searle engine does in fact levitate, but the particle inversion doesn't go through the other tridimensional framework. So he had to invent something that acts on the XOD locally, enabling this Searle disk to stay levitated. This is quite remarkable, and it gives you a complementary element to understand the Ummo documents. I should explain something about Searle. He uses a physics theory which is known but not recognized. The Searle system taps the electrostatic energy from the surroundings, producing a much more powerful energy. It's a system of production of energy which is open and is like a pump of energy resting on the cosmos. On the other hand, Searle is a revolutionary in the sense that he found a way to generate a differential which would make levitation possible. He wasn't taken seriously because of the nature of the current scientific orthodoxy. We should also mention the patent filed in the US by Boris Wolfson. He filed a patent for a spacecraft with the possibility of spaceflight. What's very interesting is that we have many patents. We have revolutions by so many isolated individuals, but we've never heard about them. I find it very surprising. One can wonder why extraterrestrials are not monsters with 18 heads and 50 limbs, although the answer is most likely all around us. The natural pathways of evolution. What could be better than a pair of hands and fingers and a thumb to grasp objects and a pair of legs to get around? What could be better than a good brain to analyze and evolve in an environment? So we can quite naturally imagine that most of our visitors also have a morphological evolution which culminated in an anthropoid humanoid form. So this is why I wanted to express demands for a recognition of exocivilizations through a manifesto. So this manifesto for the recognition of exocivilizations, what is it based on? It's based on foundations we developed in France during the Revolution, which are basic human rights, the rights of man. The manifesto proposes to extend these rights to exocivilizations, to recognize and exchange with them, and a recognition of our own ways of functioning. For example, the Geneva Convention, the Convention of the UN, and of course, human rights for human being form that we can really ground our basic exchanges in such a way that will be fruitful and will enable us to have mutual recognition. This will guarantee both to the Earth civilization and other civilizations that there will be no interference from our leaders. One of the main humanitarian gestures we should all support as citizens should be to require or demand from our leaders the return of the bodies of the extraterrestrial people who died to their families. Because I believe it would be a great human gesture towards these courageous explorers that took a risk and made the effort to come and visit our foreign soil, most likely in an attempt to protect us against ourselves.
De ces courageux explorateurs qui se donnent la peine de venir nous étudier et probablement nous protéger contre nous-mêmes surtout.
Cactus 15.9, turn left lane 270.
Cactus 1539, hit birds to southwest of Focus, returning back towards LaGuardia.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading up 220. Copy departure, returning. What is it, 15.9, he bird strike, he lost all engine, he lost the thrust in the engine.
Walking like a panther, your deep color captivates my brouhaha. In a concert of fragrances, played by Mozart and Baudelaire.